Now we had 230 sign up, so.
No waiting.
Welcome everyone. We are waiting for about 200 people to get on today's webinar. So if you'd like to chat with us and just go ahead and share where you're from, so we can get things started.
Awesomeness. Okay, there's two. Somebody's from Houston.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, everyone.
Wisconsin. Wow.
Iowa. All our lovely Texas people.
Yes. I'm so grateful. All our Texas people are internet, accessible this week, and we are not in snow. So.
That was a very scary thing of being without lights.
Yes, and water. It was definitely. We have another San Angelo person on the line.
Yep.
So.
Some more from Wisconsin, Virginia.
We have a lot of people from Wisconsin today. The United Kingdom.
United Kingdom.
Wow. South Carolina, Georgia, Iowa.
Hey, y'all.
All right. So. So we still have quite a few people logging in from the waiting room. So. And so just before we get started, for those of y'all that are using the chat feature over the Q&A feature, make sure that you check who your messages are going to. Sometimes it'll default to come to just the panelists, so the rest of the participants won't be able to see. So you'll want to make sure to check that you would like the message to go to panelists and attendees so everybody can see when we get started with the content. So. I think I need to start making a map of all the people and where they come from.
Crazy.
It's so cool. We have so many different people. We have lots of states represented today. Another Wisconsin person.
That's cool. Oh, I love you too.
New Jersey. So. San Marcos. So Florida. Wisconsin. So. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I have heard this presentation before, and I'm super excited that we were able to repeat it with more time and expanded content from what we had at our state conference, our first virtual state conference last summer, which, as we know, we all had to pivot and make changes to get all of our state conferences online. So I'm glad we can do this again. I'm really excited to introduce Foxye Jackson as our featured webinar presenter. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. We are going to use the Q&A and chat features. I'll be monitoring both of those. While we're recording, all of our cameras and microphones are muted, but if you have any questions for our speaker, please chat those in or use the Q&A box and we will get those answered. And unless they're urgent, we'll probably wait till the end to take some questions. We have one poll. And while y'all are telling us what your best description of your work is, what title best fits your work, I am going to post some links in. I know lots of new people are on today's call, so I wanted to give y'all an opportunity to get a hold of the recording plus other webinar recordings that TASA has done in the past. Those are uploaded on our YouTube channel. And then for anybody who wants to stay on our mailing list for TASA contacts, including when we're having training webinars each month, you can go to our TASA website and sign up to contact us. So I'm posting both of those links in the chat box. Hopefully you can copy those and get a hold of us and continue to train with us. So. We have about half of our participants that have completed the poll question. So give people just a couple more seconds. We have quite a few victim advocates on the line. I'm really excited to have some law enforcement on the line. So, some community organizers, the prevention people. All right, we're gonna give y'all about 10 more seconds. So, all right. So I'm gonna go ahead and close this poll, and we'll give Foxy just a few seconds to share her screen with us and get her slides up, and then we will get started with today's content. So enjoy the webinar.
Can y'all hear me? I can't see if I unmuted myself or not now. I think so. Crystal, if you'll watch the comments, because I can't see those when I do this, and if there's a question, just let me know. What happens? Huh?
I was just saying, I will definitely do that for you.
Thank you. What happens in this house stays in this house. As Crystal said, we did this presentation at the TASA conference, and it was focused on sexual assault in the Black community. And it's still very relevant for everyone involved. We'll start by a little bit about myself. I've been a registered nurse for over 22 years. I'm a sexual assault nurse examiner and forensic nurse, a certified youth mentor and coach, a Reiki Master, transitions life coach, community advocate for sexual assault and interpersonal violence. And I was the Southeast Region Fellow for All In Together's Community Leadership Program, encouraging women in civic engagement. And I am a 2-time best-selling author, and I'm currently working on a 3rd that we'll talk about later. Because I have, as you'll see on the logo, it's I Speak Foxy. I Speak Foxy was born from my own trauma. I experienced sexual assault within the family by authority figures, by law enforcement, by my partners. And so because of that, I became a really huge advocate for talking about sexual assault. One of the huge obstacles when it comes to trauma is being able to talk about it. And so we named it I Speak Foxy, so that people can be encouraged and feel safe to speak. For this session, there will be a few objectives. Move that over there. At the end, you should understand how the history of the Black Jezebel, Black culture, and religion has created a reluctance of African American women to report sexual assault. You'll understand how the brain and body respond to trauma and why this is important to know when interacting with sexual assault experiencers. You'll understand the side effects of unhealed trauma, the ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, criminal behavior, and unhealthy coping mechanisms. You'll become aware of the difficulties associated with healing from sexual assault in the African American community, and you'll become aware of healthy healing and coping methods that are effective in the African American community, and you'll understand your individual importance in improving the outcomes of the anti-sexual assault movement in the African American community. Move that a little. Can I just take, bam. The history of delayed disclosure. So there are three main sources that influence delayed disclosure in sexual assault in the Black community: the Black Jezebel, Black culture, and the Black church. And often when you are speaking to members of the Black community, when you talk about the Black church, you may get some pushback or immediate defense mechanisms. Delayed disclosure and healing. The Black Jezebel. What is the Black Jezebel? Slavery, media and entertainment, the legal system, and community resources. There are many stereotypical images used to portray the African American women, typically as oversexed, promiscuous, angry, and loud. These stereotypes and myths arose in slavery and were used to justify enslavement, rape, forced reproduction, and other forms of sexual coercion in the early onset of Western colonization. So when you talk about the Black Jezebel, there are two other stereotypes that are common in the Black community when it comes to the women. One is Sapphire, who is loud, aggressive, emasculating. She's not feminine, she's stubborn, and she's angry. Often you'll hear this one called the angry Black woman. The other one is the Mamie, or Mammy. This is the self-sacrificing, loving, nurturing Black woman who is asexual. There's nothing sexual about her. You'll often hear this one called the Medea. There are some movies, especially the Tyler Perry ones of Medea. She's like a combination of them all. But the Medea is the one who's usually wearing a dress. She usually goes to church. She never swears or curses, things like that. What this looks like to African American women is being cast for movie roles that portray her as angry, loud, or overly sexual. Common titles used are the video girl, who uses sexuality to obtain success in the entertainment industry, the gold digger, who uses sexuality for economic reward, and the diva, who uses sexuality to obtain high social class. Other present-day Black Jezebel labels are hoochies, hood rats, and welfare queens. Simply, being a Black woman creates an image of being sexually available and sexually uninhibited. And that was a quote. The influence of the Black Jezebel also shows up in the legal system, when despite evidence or witness accounts, perpetrators either receive significantly shorter sentences or receive no punishment at all for raping or sexually assaulting Black women. In fact, in the 1800s, the law was race specific and specified that only white women could be raped. Although a Black man could be lynched, castrated, or incarcerated for raping a white woman, there was no punishment for doing the same to a Black woman. And sometimes that rape didn't have to actually occur. It could be just a false accusation. A well-known case was that of Reecy Taylor in 1944. She was brutally raped by 6 white men. They threatened her family, they even confessed to the rape to the authorities. 2 grand juries did not indict them, so there wasn't enough evidence to indict them. No charges were ever filed, and it wasn't until 2011, when this woman was 92 years old, that the Alabama legislature finally apologized for not prosecuting her attackers. These types of truths have promoted incest, rape, and sexual coercion of African American children and women because nobody feels like anybody's going to get punished for doing anything. This is called A Mulher Negra Insaciável. That is Portuguese for the insatiable Black woman. This is how the Black woman is seen around the world. After a woman has experienced sexual violence, the best response is to seek help from community resources. This may include law enforcement, social work, medical personnel, a spiritual leader, shelters, and/or other community resources, which is where all of you come in. With each one, questions are asked to either create a report or qualify the individual for intake. Questions about what the victim was wearing, if the assailant is a known individual, the victim's sexual history, and the details of the assault are often asked without a trauma-informed approach. This may lead to the victim feeling encouraged to not pursue legal action, to not access other community resources, and to feel depressed, anxious, disappointed, and violated because of the interactions with these individuals who are supposed to be helping the victim. For those who do choose to seek help, they may find that there are no resources in close proximity of where they live. They may have to travel outside their neighborhood and into another neighborhood that has very few African American social workers, therapists, medical staff, law enforcement, etc. Further, many are unable to afford the needed physical or mental care due to lack of insurance. And those places that do have like grants and things there were some places that were working off of the Violence Against Women's Act, which was put on the back burner in legislature. So a lot of places lost some of their funding to even help those who have experienced trauma. And as you can see in some of the pictures, especially the one in the middle, you have the white woman with the same trench coat on, and her coat is closed. And you have the Black woman who is turned away from us with her coat open, and the man and his dogs are looking. And it says there's nothing naughty about buying this trench. Wearing it, however, is another story. So the Black woman is naughty. The other pictures have the Black woman's bottom on display or her breast on display. There's even one where they're hanging her by the foot with only a piece of cloth around her groin. So these are some of the images that are put into the subconscious of America, and they behave off of these subconscious images. Not just, quote, white America, all of America. The Black culture. Internalizing the Black Jezebel stereotypes may inhibit the Black woman and others around her from recognizing an event as a sexual assault and the woman as a legitimate victim. The reason is because she will blame herself for the sexual assault. For example, this would not have happened had I not gone over there. Or this would not have happened had I worn something different. Another thing is this new research that I'm reading and studying that's called the Adultification of Black children. And it is a survey that was done of several different participants of different racial and ethnic backgrounds. Although 74% of them were white women, it was a mixture of people. Of those, they considered the children ages 5 through 9 and 10 through 14. The Black children were considered to be less needy of compassion and nurturing than their white counterparts. The children of this age were considered to know more about adult topics like sex and carrying on what's right and what's wrong, as opposed to their white counterparts. And what this ends up being is that the Black children are punished more harshly for things that white children do in the same age group, in the same environment. And when they are receiving those types of treatment, when it comes to reporting sexual assault, it's still in the same category. It's still something that shouldn't happen. It's still something that they become afraid to say anything about because they'll be the ones who are punished, as opposed to if it was a white child, that child would be considered innocent. That child would be considered, this was not their fault. When it's the Black child, it's you should have known better. You knew that was wrong, as opposed to blaming the perpetrator. The unspoken call for African American women to be the strong Black woman creates a culture in which a Black woman is unable to show the vulnerability necessary to acknowledge child sexual assault or adult rape. And this kind of goes back to the maiming or the mammy stereotype of being that strong Black woman. The strong Black woman is one who handles all trauma without the assistance of another person, meaning they don't ask for help. They just have to deal with it on their own. Many times you'll find these women are, God will sort it out. The history of Black men being falsely accused of raping white women includes the aforementioned punishments of incarceration, lynching, castration, and even death. One of the famous boys who was accused of not raping, but whistling at a white woman was Emmett Till. He was 14 years old. And in 1955, some men, this woman went and told them that she was offended by what this little Black boy did. And they killed him. They beat him, they shot him, they tortured him, and his mother had an open casket so that the world could see what was done to her son. This was a 14-year-old little boy. As such, there is a cultural mandate that Black women protect Black men, and these women often delay disclosure because of this. A report by the Bureau of Justice Statistics found that 85% of sexual assaults for African Americans are intraracial, meaning that it's Black people to Black people. This causes some women to abstain from reporting their sexual assault due to the belief that the Black man will receive unfair treatment by the legal system, despite the relative facts we have uncovered in this session. So they feel like they have to protect the Black man from law enforcement, from the judge, from the prison system. And so oftentimes they won't disclose that they've been sexually assaulted, and instead they will keep it to themselves and deal with it within the family. Poor socialization of sexuality means members of the Black community do not talk about sex openly. It is commonly a source of shame and judgment. Children are taught socially acceptable names for their body parts instead of the medical terms. I'm very, 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 very opposed to this because often children will outcry, but no one recognizes it as such because they say someone touched their cookie or someone was playing with my honey pot. Or my what was another one? My pocketbook. Well, for many, pocketbook is a purse that you put things in to carry with you. But if a child is saying that he touched my pocketbook, How many people are going to be aware that that is their vagina or their genitals? You know, there is some shame in talking about and stating the medical terms for body parts. And that shame is displayed in not talking about those things with your children. Whenever I have an event and the children are there, I ask a question. It's more like a call and answer. And I say, girls have a, and they say vagina, and boys have a, and they say penis. Because when they become comfortable with talking about their own body, when they say, someone touched my vagina or someone touched my penis, we will know that that's exactly what happened. There can't be any way around saying, oh, they're just confused, or oh, they didn't know what they were talking about, which is a lot of what the perpetrators will do to get out of being accused of sexually assaulting a child. Without freedom to speak about sexuality and these unrealistic mandates of the Black culture, you now understand why what happens in this house stays in this house. The Black church. The Black church is traditionally a powerful influencer in the Black community and considered an extension of the Black family. Per survey, 85% of African Americans ascribe to being part of some religious group. The clergy and church members are looked upon as doing the work of God. So when they commit sexual violence, it causes great confusion to the victim, who then wonders, how can I believe in Jesus' love for me when the pastor who preaches and teaches about Jesus does things that are the exact opposite of what is being preached and taught? In many cases, if the sexual assault is reported to church personnel, it is handled within the church denomination and not reported to law enforcement. Although the Baptist and the Church of God in Christ denominations, for example, have advocacy groups that handle these offenses, the victim may feel nothing was done or will be done to the perpetrator. Thus, it becomes an internal secret, and what happens in the church house stays in the church house. There was one guy who was accused, prosecuted, and convicted of sexually assaulting his granddaughter. He was a deacon. He was, in fact, the chairman of the deacon board. And he did his prison term, and he got out of prison, and they put him right back on the deacon board, which made no sense to me. In their eyes, it's he committed a sin, and we forgive him, and we're going to restore him back to what he was. Well, in reality, what you've done is told those who've been sexually assaulted that there is no real punishment. There's no lasting punishment. He went and did 5, 10, maybe 20 years, but that person who was sexually assaulted has to live with that for the rest of their life. It's a life sentence. In the church sermons and lessons, the woman at the well is talked about repeatedly. According to the Bible, she was caught in adultery and brought before Jesus in an effort to have her punished. That's John chapter 4, verses 4 through 26. It is also well known that having sex with someone who is not one's spouse is forbidden, and the guilty one will be judged by God. That's Hebrews 13 and 4. However, not much is said about the rapes of Dinah in Genesis 34, 1 through 31. Tamar in 2 Samuel 13, 1 through 14, or the Levite's concubine in Judges 19, 22 through 26. Neither is anything said for the same Levite offering his daughter to be raped by a mob, or Dinah's father agreeing to force her to marry the man who raped her, or Moses telling his troops to save the virgins for themselves. This was right after he told them to kill all the women who had had sex with the Israelites, the troops, because they had enticed them to turn against God. So now you're accusing the women of enticing the men and turning them from God, as if the men had no control over anything that happened. The problem arises when the church attending Black woman is feeling confused about her experience of sexual violence, and she only hears about the judgment she will receive for engaging in sex outside marriage, or concludes that the perpetrating church member is safe from judgment by God because of the men in the Bible who went unpunished for allowing or participating in the rape of women. Or the message is that God protects those whom he loves, but this woman was not protected from being raped. For me, it was all of this, including the message that I should just forgive the perpetrator and allow God to exact punishment instead of accessing the legal system for that. Or told, oh, he served his time, he should be left alone, as if I wasn't serving that same sentence, except mine doesn't go away at the end of my sentencing. Although the same things that create a reluctance for Black women to report sexual assault altogether are the same things that make the healing process difficult. So now we're going to kind of switch gears. See what it is. Okay, perfect. And we're going to talk about the brain on trauma. Are there any questions that I need to answer right now?
We had one question about some of the research that you mentioned. And that's it.
Okay, so at the end, I have some reference lists. And for the one about the adultification of Black children, that was by Rebecca Epstein. And I don't have that on the reference because that was something that I've done since I put this together. You can also Google adultification of Black children. It started out as a survey where they were trying to see if this really was a perception. And then once they found that it was a perception, they have gone on now to ask a sample of Black women, and it's called the lived adultification of Black children. Okay, so the brain on trauma. Let's look at what happens during these traumatic events so we can better understand the effects of unhealed trauma. The three parts of the brain prominent during a traumatic experience are the brainstem, the limbic system, and the prefrontal cortex. It is important to remember that the brainstem is the oldest part of the brain and controls basic life functions of breathing, sleeping, the heart beating, and sensations. As you can see on the slide, it's also called the survival brain. It's the part of the brain that goes into high mode, or the most active part of the brain, when you're in a mode or state of feeling like you're just surviving or you need to survive. It's a life or death situation. The next oldest is the limbic system, which contains memories and emotions. This system includes the amygdala, which sends a signal to activate the stress response once it detects a stressor. The prefrontal cortex is the last to develop and is the place of higher level brain functioning, such as reasoning, rational thought, decision-making, and language expression. The prefrontal cortex is also where Broca's area is, which is where we talk about speaking. The other part of the limbic system is the hippocampus, and it also controls feelings, like your emotions. This is another picture of the visual functioning of these three areas. It is important to note that during a traumatic experience, the prefrontal cortex does not function at its normal levels. I'll repeat that. During a traumatic experience, the prefrontal cortex does not function at its normal levels. That means that they're not able to plan, they're not able to anticipate, they're not able to do decision making. They're not able to completely understand what's going on. During a sexual assault, the brainstem continues to keep the victim alive by maintaining basic life functions and secreting stress chemicals that put the person in a state of survival. These chemicals narrow down the function of the brain to survival, and limbic system takes over. At this point, the primary brain functions are sensations, sight, smell, taste, feel, hearing, memory, and emotions. The language center, which is Broca's area, is in the prefrontal cortex and is not receiving much stimulation at this time. This particular section comes from The Body Keeps the Score. And I'll show you this book because it's a good read for anyone who is dealing with trauma. It is by Bessel van der Kolk. He did a lot of research, and much of this comes from a functional MRI, which is where they look at the brain while it is experiencing a particular thing. So they may have a control where they talk about something happy and they look at the person's brain and the functions, which areas are functioning during that time. And then they'll talk about something that was traumatic for that person and look at the brain and see which parts are functioning during that time. So you have a woman who can remember what she has felt, smelled, tasted, saw, and heard, but cannot express it in language. Because of this, when I take a history from a sexual assault patient, I ask them what they remember feeling, smelling, tasting, seeing, and hearing. They may have seen a tattoo, or heard a voice, or smelled alcohol, or tasted something salty, and so on. This approach accesses the parts of the brain that were highly stimulated at the time of trauma. Otherwise, asking them to give a detailed account of the event as if they were reading it out of a book adds to their frustration of not understanding why they cannot find the words to describe what happened to them. I remember when we were doing some of our training for sexual assault nurse examiner, and as well as reading other books like The Gift of Fear, there were instances where the person could not remember what the assailant looked like, but they could remember the smell of their cologne. They could remember the time on the clock because it was lit up. They could remember the sound of a train that was going by at that particular time. They could remember what was on television, what they were hearing going on the television. All of those things are important because they help establish a time frame when that person can't establish a time frame. Asking me, okay, so another example is when I was in court, and the court document says on or about September the 19th, this, and happened. And so the attorney comes and quizzes me and says, gives me a calendar to look at the calendar and tells me that this particular day was on a Sunday, and there's no way that this could have happened because the school wasn't opened on a Sunday. And my response was, the statement is that it's on or about September the 15th or 19th or whatever date it was. So these are just little things that you can keep in mind when you ask them their history, and they're trying to give you their history of what happened. You will notice that they'll go back and forth. They'll tell you things that may have happened at the beginning, and then they'll flip to something that happened at the end, back to something that happened in the middle. And the problem with that is that for law enforcement, they want things in order. They want to know how it happened from beginning to end. And they get frustrated when it doesn't come out like that. And sometimes I've had law enforcement say that they didn't trust what the person was telling them because they didn't tell it in a particular order. The fact is that they cannot tell you in a particular order because that part of the brain shuts off. Now they're in a survival mechanism. They're in survival mode of trying to get out of this situation alive. So let's look at some normal functions of the central nervous system. Here on the, I think it's going to be on the left for you, it says parasympathetic nerves. On the right is the sympathetic nerves. On the left, the parasympathetic is what happens when your body is at rest and not in any trauma. On the right is what happens when your body is in trauma or your body feels like it is in a survival mode. It's sympathizing with you and your condition. So it's doing all of these things on the right. Your pupils dilate, your salivation is inhibited, your heart rate goes up, your airways are relaxed so that you can get more oxygen in, your stomach activity is inhibited, your gallbladder is inhibited, the activity of your intestines are slowed down. Then you have epinephrine and norepinephrine that are secreted by the kidneys and the adrenals. Your bladder is relaxed, so there's no urine coming out. On the other side, when you're not in a stressful situation, your pupils constrict, you're able to salivate. Your heart rate slows down, your airways constrict and become normal. And then the stimulation of your GI system, your stomach, your gallbladder, your liver, your intestines are all working and functioning. Your bladder is able to empty itself. The parasympathetic nervous system is in control when someone is calm. The sympathetic nervous system kicks in during times of stress. It does just the opposite of the parasympathetic nervous system. The body and the brain on trauma. So we often hear about the fight or flight, but we never hear about the other ones. There's fight that we're familiar with. You stand there, you fight it out. There's flight where you turn and you flee the situation. There's freeze where you become immobilized. You can't move. You're numb. Nothing works. There's flop where you play dead. There have been plenty of women who play dead. And of course, all of this goes for both men and women. Please understand me on that. But at the moment, it's just, I'm talking about women because primarily the largest majority of reported sexual assault is that of women. And the last one is friend or appease. So it's fight, flight, freeze, flop, and friend or appease. Appease is when you make friends with them or you try to satiate them. You try to do what they want you to do in the hopes that they will let you live through it. You'll often see this particular one in domestic violence situations or interpersonal violence situations where the woman stays there and tries to appease the man, hoping that he'll never hit her again or hoping that he won't kill her or her children or her pets or whatever. Each of these responses is correct and normal for that individual. And these responses change depending on the situation. So the person doesn't always respond the same in every stressful situation. When interacting with women, understand that you may have to reinforce this truth. You may have to remind them that whatever they did, however they responded, was normal, was okay. When the trauma is prolonged or the body is unable to completely recuperate from one trauma before another occurs, the person may develop post-traumatic stress disorder or complex post-traumatic stress disorder. The amygdala continues to use emotions and unclear memories to judge events as dangerous and sends out a distress signal to the body. Eventually, this wears out these organs and damage occurs. You'll often find, as we looked on the different functions of the sympathetic nervous system, you'll often find that these people have anxiety. They judge certain situations that shouldn't be dangerous to us or someone on the outside. They judge those situations as dangerous. They may have constipation, indigestion, diabetes, high blood pressure, breathing problems. They may have frequent headaches. They may have fibromyalgia. These are all symptoms of an overexerted sympathetic nervous system. So what does all this mean? Disorganized thought, difficulty with chronological order, irrational behavior, difficulty remembering, physical sexual responses during assault, and psychosomatic systems, which we have talked about each one of these things. When interacting with trauma clients, remember, they may have disorganized thought. They may have difficulty giving the details of the event in chronological order. Sometimes it may be easier for them to write down what happened than it is to say what happened. They may also display irrational behavior. They may deny or report with cognitive dissonance that their bodies physically responded to the sexual activity. Reassure them that this is a normal response of the body and does not mean they enjoyed or otherwise approved of the assault. This goes back to talking about sex in the family. Oftentimes it has been said, well, if your body responded, then you wanted it. And this keeps people from disclosing that they have been sexually assaulted. It is also common in men because there's a different orgasm that a man gets from anal penetration. And if that man becomes erect or actually has an orgasm and ejaculates during that sexual assault because a different part of his body is being stimulated, he may become severely embarrassed, severely depressed, and will not disclose that he was sexually assaulted, because then he has to wrestle with, am I homosexual? Am I bisexual? Am I heterosexual? What am I if I responded to that? It is very important that this particular community, understands the normal responses of the body, so that when our victims or our survivors or our experiencers come to us with these thoughts of depression and shame because their bodies responded, we have to know and be able to speak to that being a normal response of the body. Trauma unhealed. Adverse childhood experiences. Without appropriate closure and treatment, the trauma remains unhealed. Adverse childhood experiences or traumas that occur in childhood often set precedents for additional trauma in adulthood and create negative effects on the physical, emotional, and behavioral bodies. These are relevant because about 62% of adults have experienced some type of trauma, some type of traumatic event during their childhood. About 1 in every 5 African American women are reported to have been raped at some point in their lifetime. And I do say reported because there's a large majority that do not report it. There's a larger majority that do not even understand that they've been sexually assaulted. That equates to 3.1 billion Black rape victims and 5.9 million Black survivors of other forms of sexual violence. For example, sexual coercion and unwanted sexual contact. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. That's enough to fill up some countries. Some specifics of adverse childhood experiences, the specifics of the mental health issues, cardiovascular disease, gastrointestinal disease, behavioral issues. These are some of the things that I was just talking about that you'll find are often seen in victims of any kind of traumatic experience. And those traumatic experiences aren't limited to just sexual assault, although we're talking about sexual assault. This could be a death of a loved one. This could be the homicide of a loved one. This can be loss of a job, loss of income. These are all traumatic events for people. And if they become unhealed, then we end up with some of these same things. These are just a few of the diseases and disorders commonly seen in adults who had some form of childhood trauma. You will notice many of these are very prevalent among Black women. I want to point out that substance abuse is a coping method, and I have noticed it a lot in sexual assault patients. If you approach substance abuse as a method of coping with a traumatic event, your approach to the patient may be more successful. Many patients are embarrassed about their substance abuse and their substance use. And when you approach them with a judgmental attitude of, well, you shouldn't do it, as opposed to finding out why. Why did they choose? What are they coping with? What are they trying to get away from? What reality are they fighting against that they feel like they need to use substances? Depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, anger issues, ischemic heart disease, which are like blood clots on the heart arteries, heart attack, chronic lung disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Those are all breathing problems. Constipation, irritable bowel syndrome, obesity, and of course the substance abuse, smoking, prostitution, criminal behavior, and even cancer. So far, we have talked about the Black Jezebel, Black culture, and the Black church, and how they have contributed to African American women not reporting they have been sexually assaulted, and how this results in difficulty healing from this trauma. We have also reviewed how the brain and body respond to trauma and why this is important when interacting with sexual assault patients or clients. We also listed a few of the diseases, disorders, and behaviors that are commonly seen among adults who have experienced adverse childhood experiences. You now have a better or renewed understanding of the saying in the Black community, what happens in this house stays in this house, and the devastating consequences of that mandate. Now let's talk about healthy, healing, and coping. And are there any questions that I need to answer at this point before we move on to the next part?
We have several people asking about the slides and if you'd be comfortable sharing those after the presentation.
Sure.
Okay. And then we have a question about the percentage of Black people being raped and unreporting. Is that something that you are aware of?
The difficulty with getting a specific percentage of that is that they don't report.
Mm-hmm.
When people ask me, I did one interview and we were talking about human trafficking and things like that. And when you ask me about the number of women who have reported being sexually assaulted, oftentimes now they'll say 1 in 4. So for every 4 women, 1 of them has been sexually assaulted. And I tell them to double that because just as many who do report, there's just as many who don't report. I was at an event, it was a networking event, and we were trading business cards, and this lady sold Mary Kay. And when I gave her my card, she looked at it and she sat down with me and she began to tell me how when she was a young girl, this woman was in her 60s. And she's telling me when she was like 5, 6 years old, she was sexually assaulted by a family member. And she has never spoken about it until this moment right here. So you just multiply that, that's a lot of people that are not reporting.
Mm-hmm. And just a couple of housekeeping notes. I did upload the PDF copy of the study that Foxy referenced, and then also a link for The Body Keeps the Score for anybody who's not familiar with that work. So all those are in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. Healthy healing and coping. Everything you need, your courage, strength, compassion, and love, everything you need is already within you. Oftentimes, this is something that I use with those who have been sexually assaulted, especially those who are in organized religion, because they're looking outside of themselves to God for that strength. And sometimes they can't find it or they put a barrier up because the person who represented God to them is the one who sexually assaulted them. How do you aid in the healing process of these women? What do you do? First, remind these women that all of the courage, strength, compassion, and love they need to heal begins with them. Their primary objective is to begin to give these emotions to themselves. It is also the most difficult. After experiencing much victim shaming, victim blaming, and disbelief, they may internalize these feelings and project them onto themselves as a coping mechanism. If I dislike and blame myself, it does not hurt as bad when someone else does it. I have had to, I have had to remind people on several occasions when we would get a sexual assault patient, the first question is, do you believe her? And my immediate answer is, yes, I do. Why shouldn't I? We believe people when they come in here and they say they had a heart attack, or that their head hurts, or that they broke their leg 2 years ago. We believe that. Why would we not believe a person who comes in and says that they were sexually assaulted? Those are things that are shaming. Those are things that make the victim feel like maybe it was her fault or his fault. Because if they don't believe me, then maybe my perception of this reality is not true. And that further makes them not want to disclose that experience. Teach them to be in the present, mindful, and aware. Being in the present helps them, it helps keep them from being stuck in the past of what happened in the past. It also helps keep them from going into the future and imagining all of these awful things that can happen to them in the future, which causes anxiety. So when they're stuck in the past, you'll find that they're depressed. When they're stuck in the future, you'll find that they are anxious. When they go back and forth, sometimes you'll find that they're bipolar. Journaling is my number one assignment to anyone healing from trauma. Writing is cathartic and it accesses a different part of the brain and soul. The process and action of writing forces the prefrontal cortex to work with the limbic system. And if you'll recall, the prefrontal cortex is where all the reasoning and decision-making, the higher level thinking is, and it's completely shut off during traumatic events, and is why a lot of times they can't remember what happened. Thus, there is a non-threatening action that is encouraging the person to put words and memories together. This is lost during a traumatic experience. Journaling helps the person recognize, process, and feel emotions. This is necessary in order to heal these emotions. One cannot heal what one cannot feel. And it's also very helpful for law enforcement too. When I've done sexual assault exams and the person is getting ready to leave, I have encouraged them to get a journal and keep it by the bed or keep it with them, because when they wake up and they remember certain things, it gives them an opportunity to write those things down immediately before it leaves their mind. Sometimes they'll have flashbacks, and if they can write down those flashbacks, it helps with law enforcement trying to track down the perpetrator or build a case. It also helps with understanding what things that they need to be healed from, and it helps to get it out. My favorite thing is massage. One of my favorite things. Many do not incorporate massage or even recognize benefits. I used massage therapy as touch therapy. My massage therapist is trained to massage all persons, including those who have experienced trauma. I began getting massages with much anxiety and my husband in the room. Over the years, and I'm talking about like 4 or 5 years, it progressed to me feeling comfortable with another man touching me while I am in a vulnerable position. That is, my eyes are closed, I'm naked, and the lights are dim. That was a trigger for me. Massage also helps with stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system, improving sleep, reducing depression and anxiety, decreasing stress and pain, and it improves overall health and wellness. And I would encourage everyone who deals with sexual assault or trauma or any kind of violence to use these techniques that we're talking about for themselves as well, because there's also vicarious trauma. Back to the stimulating of the parasympathetic nervous system, that is the part that tells your body you're safe, you can rest, and you can heal. If the parasympathetic nervous system is never turned on and activated fully, the body does not heal physically, mentally, or emotionally. So that is why massage is very, very powerful. And my massage therapist is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. If you want to get his information, I'll give it to you at the end. The other thing is the church being involved in sexual assault awareness and prevention. The Black church is so involved in every aspect of the Black family for those who are in organized religion, and they need to be just as responsible for sexual assault awareness and prevention as everyone else outside the Black church. Diversify the staff of rape crisis centers. A lot of times the victims who are Black or even Latino, they want someone who speaks their language. They want someone who understands what they're talking about. They want someone who, when they go in and say, I was messed with by my uncle, that person will understand that that means that the uncle was sexually assaulting them. They want someone who looks like them, someone who understands things that are unspoken in the culture. Increase community awareness of resources. There is I think it's Trauma Support Center that is in South Dallas, Lancaster type area. But at one point, no one I talked to knew about them. I found out about them from going to an event. So we have to increase awareness of community resources that are not just the mainstream resources like Dallas Area Rape Crisis Center or TASA or Trauma Support Center or the Turning Point. These are all very common resource centers. We have a duty to get in there and talk about those resources in the community that are run by other Black people, so that when Black people have issues, they can go to other people that look like them. Some of these places are 501c3s. Some of these places are nonprofits. Some of these places are counselors and therapists. We need to be aware of, there are links that link people to other therapists in their area, in their state, in their community that are Black. These are important things to have on hand when you're dealing with people from the African American community. Trauma-informed training for all who interact with sexual assault individuals. That includes law enforcement, that includes the medical, that includes social, that includes community advocates, that includes people in the church, any kind of leadership position. That can even include people in corporate America, because people in corporate America commit sexual assault. So if you're talking about 1 in every 4 women that have reported, 1 in every 5 men who have reported, and that's not including the ones who haven't reported. This is something that everybody has come in contact with. We're not exempt. Just because you feel that you haven't been sexually assaulted and your friends have never told you that they've been sexually assaulted does not make you exempt. It just means that they haven't said anything about it, possibly. We have to teach against rape myths, meaning we have to teach against it being your fault or it's my fault. Or if she hadn't worn that, well, she shouldn't have went to that hotel. Well, she shouldn't have put on those skimpy shorts. If I'm walking around outside naked, it does not give anyone the right to violate me. Just like if I'm walking outside with my purse on, does not give anyone the right to steal my purse. Research, more and more research, read the research that's being done, which is why I talk about research when we're doing it. A lot of the research, the ones who are doing the research, they reach out to members of the Black community for participation. However, because of a long history of not trusting white America, a lot of times they don't participate in that research. And so it limits the knowledge that we have about what goes on in the Black community. Civic engagement. Civic engagement is what I was doing with All In Together. It is a nonprofit organization out of New York. And they promote women in civic leadership positions, whether that's voting at your school board, become involved in your child's education, run for an office, support someone who's running for an office, find out if the VAWA or the Violence Against Women's Act has been put on the table for voting, send letters, bug those people who we voted into office. All of that is civic engagement, and becoming self-aware. I was talking with Crystal before this happened, and I was talking about how I've done sexual assault for so many years, and then I became a forensic nurse, and then I was doing sexual assault advocacy, and it was becoming something that was a constant trauma for me. I was constantly reliving someone else's trauma, and in reliving their trauma, I'm reliving my trauma, sorry. So it's very important that we become self-aware of those things that are causing us trauma, and that we are willing to take a step back when it becomes too much for us. I've always told people, and it's a common thing that is said, we have to put the oxygen on ourselves first before we can do anything to help other people. I love this little thing because I love butterflies. Why is all of this important? As I've stated, sexual assault affects everyone in the community, in every single community, making it everyone's responsibility to become involved in the healing process. There are millions who have reported being affected by sexual assault, and millions more who are still keeping it a secret. We are supposed to change, evolve. It was my intention that you would hear or see something that ignited a change within you, a change that created healing and understanding for you and someone else. If we are to make a difference in mental health, physical health, behavioral health, and the criminal presence in the Black community, we remain serious about implementing solutions that increase reporting of sexual assault so these women can obtain the healing they need and deserve. Are there any questions or comments? And I'm going to start displaying the references at this point.
All right, we had a few questions start coming in. The first one is, do the numbers of survivors increase if the person has a disability or are a part of the LGBTQ community?
For this one, when it talks about the Black community, it included all of those things. It included those in the LGBTQ, and it included those in who are disabled. Of course, those who are disabled and those who are members of the LGBTQ community are at a higher risk of being sexually assaulted because they are vulnerable individuals. Those who are disabled, most of the time they can't talk about it. So yes, they are sexually assaulted a lot more than those who are not. A lot of times, if they can talk, they can't express what happened. And sometimes you'll only see like changes in their behavior. For example, my son is not disabled. However, when he was about, was almost 2, but he was talking like 18 months, and one of the teachers physically assaulted him, and he couldn't express that verbally. However, his behavior changed. And so when the children's behavior changes, it's very important that when you're asking children questions, that you are mindful how you ask them, because you can implant memories into their minds that are not what happened. And for that, that is why we have the Child Advocacy Center around the country, where you get them interviewed, or find a therapist who specializes in forensic interviewing of children, so that they can ask them questions to find out what happened without implanting unnecessary memories within those children. Members of the LGBTQ community are often shunned in the Black community, especially if there's organized religion involved, because it is against the Bible. And according to the Bible, they're all going to hell. So a lot of times they don't talk about it. There are times when they call it, I forgot the name that they call it, but they will rape lesbian women to make them, I think it's called straight rape or something like that. But they'll rape like the lesbian women to make them straight.
Like
Or
to turn them. Yeah, the
to
term I've
turn
heard
them.
is to turn them. Yeah.
And they'll do the same thing to men to make them want women again. It doesn't work. Just like you were born heterosexual and you were born and you grew up and you liked men, even though no matter what's around you, you still liked men. That's just how you were born. If you grew up and you like women, then that's just how you were born. That is not to say that there are no people in the LGBT community who decided that they didn't want to be with the opposite sex because of a trauma. Those exist just as well. Regardless of why they have chosen to be lesbian or gay or bisexual or transsexual or whatever, the thing is that we have to make a safe environment for them to come forward and say, hey, this happened to me. I know there's a resource center in Dallas that is for the LGBTQ community. There are several therapists who, I need to find that link. Let me find that link so I can post it in the chat. This link is where you can find, you can search the Open Path Collective. You can search for therapists and you can sort them by whether or not they deal with LGBTQ issues or they're LGBTQ friendly, or if you want one who is about, there it goes, who is about, is this right? I'm trying to put it in the chat. Oh, my stuff is not working right now. I'm gonna have to stop sharing. There we go. Open Path Collective. You can search for a therapist based upon their gender, what they specialize in, where they're located, all of that. It's amazing that many know someone who's being raped, but few can say they know a rapist. This is true. Because no one holds them accountable. And I won't say no one because that's an all-inclusive. Oftentimes they're not held accountable for their actions, or their actions are rationalized, if you will. How can we find a massage therapist that knows how to work with sexual trauma victims? Sometimes you have to just ask them. RockyCarterLMT.com. Let me make sure that's his. That's the one who worked with me. And I didn't tell him that I was a trauma, LMT.com. I didn't tell him that I had experienced trauma because it just feels embarrassing to talk about it all the time to people, especially people that you do not know. But I would ask them, what are their specialties? That way they can talk about if they do neuromuscular release, or if they do pregnancy, or if they do children. You can talk about what their specialties are. And then you can ask them, well, have you ever worked with trauma victims? Have you ever worked with people who need touch therapy? And they can say yes or no. That way it's kind of filtered into everything else that you're asking them. So it doesn't seem like it's specific to, are you good with trauma? Do you feel that sexual assault victims facilitate assailants by not coming forward to feel they have not committed a crime. I think that assailants are able to get away with sexually assaulting people when people don't come forward, as well as when they do come forward and nothing is done, that also facilitates them perpetrating again. So it's not all on the sexual assault victim, it's also on the rest of us who are involved in that whole process. The person who does the rape kit, the person who admits them to the ER, the person who takes the report. I've had law enforcement that I had to get a little ugly with because this lady said that she wanted to commit suicide. They brought her in, and then when the psychologist asked why, she said, because my husband raped me. And so I had to call the police out, and this one showed up and he was like, I'm not filing a report. I'm not taking a report because she wasn't raped. I said, and how do you know that? Because she didn't tell me on the beginning. Who are you that she has to tell you initially? Maybe she didn't feel safe telling you anything because you have the attitude that you have right now. And so they ended up, we had to go through this whole thing, getting the sergeant involved and everything. And he finally decided to take the report. And he said he was going to go interview her. And I said, no, you're not. The other guy who showed up, I said, they can go interview her, but you're not going in there to my patient. And he said that, well, I'm the acting or whatever. And I was like, I don't care. I'll call your sergeant. He said, well, my sergeant's in the bed. I said, there's always a sergeant on call. Yeah. My husband was a police officer, so you can miss me with all that. Yeah.
Oh, there was one more question that kind of bumped up, talking about any journaling apps. I can't remember the exact phrasing they used, but
I just saw that too. How can we find a massage therapist? I saw it, but I can't remember the specific phrasing of the journaling thing. I use pen and paper. I know a lot of people are tech savvy and they want to type it into their phones and all that. It does not do the same thing as pen and paper. It'll get you there, but I've seen better results with actually having to sit down and use pen and paper. Texting, you can swipe. That's not really drawing anything when you're texting on a journal app. If you speak it, you're not really putting your hand to motion with your brain, because your hand has to follow. It has to remember how to make the letters, how to make the words. It has to remember punctuation. It has to actively activate the prefrontal cortex. A lot of survival things, I can survive and read. I can survive and talk and text real fast. You text when you're in trouble. Even though it may have some misspelled words, even then, autocorrect's going to fix that. So the better thing is to actually get pen and paper and sit down and make some time for yourself to journal.
my camera decided it didn't want to work for just a second there.
So about the Rasa Tislin, about the taking verses out of context, I didn't take any verses out of context. I just listed the ones where it talks about specific things. I used to teach Sunday school for several years, like over 20 years. So I know the rest of the back content. That's why I gave you those specific verses so you could read them. My point is that we talk about all these other verses in the Bible, but we never talk about the rapes. We never talk about them as sexual violence. And so what happens when a woman comes across these verses of sexual violence and it's never talked about, but we talk about the woman who was caught in adultery and is brought before Jesus to be punished, we talk about that. So then there's a disconnect. There's a gap in being complete and upfront with what's in the Bible. these actions are in the Bible. I didn't say that they condone it, but not talking about them is the issue. We have to talk about it.
And then Anastasia says, I've been reading Women Under Fire, Abuse in the Military by Sarah Blum. The heartbreaking POC stories and how commanders, doctors, everyone handled the assault really sheds a light on the marginalization of people of color in that area specifically.
Wow. What was the name of that? Women Under Fire?
Women Under Fire, Abuse in the Military by Sarah L. Blum. That sounds like a good read.
It does. I have so many books. These are
Me
just
too.
a few of them. I got like hundreds of books in the other room. Yeah. So let me share our last slide of how to contact me. On the 26th of March, we're supposed to be doing a virtual event for All In Together on sexual assault. You can reach me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook as I Speak Foxy. The two books that I was part of, Inspirations and Manifestations, are available on Amazon, Kindle, Barnes & Noble, or you can order them directly from me. My upcoming book is called Lies and Lullabies, Transforming Trauma into Wellness. And as soon as I can get that finished, it will be wonderful and amazing.
No pressure.
Right?
All right. Does
Yeah.
anybody else have any other questions, either in the Q&A feature or on the chat box? So. All right, we have just a few minutes left in our webinar today. Foxy, do you have any last insight or things that you'd like to share with the audience before we go?
I always say be gentle with your healing. Just as we have to get these survivors healing, we have to heal ourselves too. When you are experiencing their trauma by listening to their stories and treating them and working for them, you are also experiencing a trauma and your body is going to respond the same. There are often times when we hear a story and we get angry or we get tearful or we go to the office and we're like, why is this happening? You know, and for a lot of people, we get stoic, we get hard, we become emotionless because we see it so much that we can't even access that part of our brain that allows us to be empathetic. So do some healing for yourself, just alongside with that you're encouraging these survivors to do. Reach out to me if you need anyone to speak in an event. I know I'm gonna try to send the slides because I tried to send them to Crystal earlier and it was just blank. I don't know what happened. That's not my area of expertise. So I'll try again. If we can't get them and you need me to present it again, I'd be more than happy to do that for you.
All right, everyone, thank you so much for being with us today. This is going to be our last webinar for this part of the year. We're going to take a break and we will come back with a special series for Sexual Assault Awareness Month in April. If you have not heard yet, the TASA conference is going to be virtual this year. We are currently taking requests for proposals, so if you would like to submit to present, please do so. That's on our TASAconference.org website, or you can get a hold of me, cgarcia@tasa.org, and I can help you with that. We did announce today, because of the weather last week, we are extending that deadline for 2 more weeks. So they were supposed to close on Monday. We actually now have till March 15th. Check out TASA's Facebook page for more information, links, and the YouTube page for all of our webinars. So we'll see y'all back again in April.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Crystal. See you later.